Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We have made it to the end of another work week, but there should be little call for celebration or, for that matter, even relaxation this weekend. The COVID crisis, it continues to get worse in America and could soon expand far beyond just a health crisis. Though there is precious little good news on the public health front as well. More on the record-breaking number of cases and deaths. We're going to have that in a few minutes. But tonight what we wanted to do was focus on COVID and the economy. Now, with the virus getting worse, there are real concerns about our economy's ability to rebound. And even that could get a lot worse, and soon. As the new epidemic appears on the horizon, an epidemic of foreclosures and evictions could leave millions without homes. That could compound the public health crisis and eviscerate any chance at all of an economic recovery, even a version of it. And like the government could and should have done more to stop the outbreaks and to blunt the impact of a COVID recession, Washington could help the foreclosures and evictions and economic pains, stop them from happening, or at least soften them. If, and that's a big if they could muster the will, the bipartisanship, and the sanity to get it done. For more, I want to bring in senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman. And Andrew, every night we focus on the big story, which is obviously the deaths and the positive tests and the spread of this virus. But obviously the economy's hurting, but in a couple weeks, we could be facing a calamity here that is preventable, but nonetheless that we're staring at in the face.
And there is a chance to get out ahead on this, Rich. Washington is slowly beginning to react to the need, and they're talking about extensions to some of these COVID coping benefits, but politics and partisanship are working against them. So is time if their goal is to make sure that assistance is not interrupted. This is the depth of the problem begins to sink in. First up, jobs. And for all the talk about jobs being created and the rate of unemployment filings dropping each week, the overall numbers are still astounding. More than 51 million Americans have either lost their jobs or been laid off since the pandemic began. And if states have to shut down again, as some of them may have to, that number is going to get even higher. But there's another crisis coming that Rich mentioned that could keep people out of their homes. 30 million Americans missed their housing payments in full or in part in June, and 32 million missed their payments in July. Now, Congress has passed a foreclosure ban on homes bought with federal loans, but that's a small number of loans. It's also blocked evictions through the middle of August, but evictions are more of a state issue, and some states have already started resuming evictions, which means millions could soon be out of their homes, all because of COVID. Now, that relief was part of the bill that Congress passed earlier this year. Other provisions enable people unemployed by COVID to access Obamacare. Lawmakers boosted food stamp benefits, made it easier for people to get food stamps. They provided billions in aid to businesses and help for student loan payments as well. But the best known virus relief benefit, and the one Republicans object to the most, is that provision that adds $600 a month to an individual's unemployment benefits. Republicans are absolutely convinced that that help is too good for the public. They're convinced people will refuse to go back to work because unemployment just pays so well.
We surely can't continue $600 a month on top of the states because we're paying people more not to work than to work. And when you pay people more not to work than work, obviously a lot of them won't work, and we need to encourage people to get back.
Now, Grassley said that despite widespread evidence that the extra money is helping the economy when the economy needs it most. A study from J.P. Morgan Chase shows Americans who got that extra COVID unemployment, they spent more than they did when they were working. That's good for the unemployed. They were able to buy food and medicine. It's also good for the economy. Senate Republicans are now talking about extending some of the aspects of those deals, though probably not before the bills sunset at the end of this month. Mitch McConnell is talking about extending with smaller benefits. They also want COVID liability shields for every American business. The president says he wants another tax cut as part of a deal. Democrats, they just want to extend the current bill. Final note here, we mentioned the possible eviction and foreclosure crises that could be coming. Here's some perspective. Michigan, which is about to restart evictions, expects about 80,000 of them in their state, while the nationwide total could be closer to 23 million people. Rich?
Unbelievable, Andrew. Now, for more here on the pending foreclosure and eviction crisis and how they would impact the recession and our fight against the virus, We bring in our first guest, Christopher Lu. Chris is a former U.S. Deputy Secretary of Labor. He also served as assistant to the President and the White House Cabinet Secretary for the United States under President Obama from 2009 to 13. Thank you very much for a few minutes. And I'm intentionally going to try and scare my audience a little bit with your help. And I do that because I think that a complacency in many ways have set in through this pandemic that, you know, tomorrow's going to be a better day, everything's fine. And I think there's a realization setting in that we do not have this under control, and more than relitigate all the mistakes the federal government has made and the false promises, there are some key dates coming up, Chris, that I know some people know about, but I don't know if they completely have their arms around. Let's tell people what could happen at the end of this month, if not technically even before, for millions of Americans if Congress does nothing. I'm specifically talking about the CARES Act.
Yeah, so let's take a look at the U.S. economy right now is in a pretty fragile position. You know, the other day we learned that 33 million people overall are on some kind of unemployment. And at the end of this month, actually before the end of this month, a key provision that provides $600 extra a week in enhanced unemployment benefits is about to expire. Also about to expire in the next couple of weeks, if not next month, is a moratorium on evictions from people who have not been able to pay rent or pay their mortgage. And that's important because a recent survey found that 32% of Americans could not pay their full mortgage or rent payment this past month. And so the economy is in this very fragile position right now. It's only doing as well as it has been doing or picking up because the federal government has pumped a lot of money into the economy. That spigot's about to turn off unless Congress and the president agree on something over the next week. And that could plunge a very fragile economic recovery into a much deeper recession.
And let's remind people, before we even heard of the coronavirus, there was a number that surprised me. 40% of Americans had less than $400 in the bank here. So they, you know, one little thing goes wrong, the car breaks down, somebody in the family gets sick, whatever else. And before we were dealing with a pandemic, they were in dire straits. 60% income cut here for millions of Americans. And we're hearing potentially could cause, and I'm using the phrase that one expert said, a tsunami of evictions. At the end of this month, if the money goes away, you're going to have almost a triple whammy. You're going to have, obviously, no cushion left to go off of, no job to go to, and possibly no roof over their heads. And we're not talking about a tiny sliver of a population. Millions and millions of Americans could be impacted by this.
Yeah, your point is an important one. You know, prior to the pandemic, you know, it was easy to kind of look at the record stock market gains and sort of assume that everyone was doing this great in this country. And the vast majority of people were essentially living paycheck to paycheck. Their wages have not grown in the last couple of years, yet the cost of everything else, whether it's groceries, gas, or education expenses, have continued to rise. And so it wouldn't take much to throw most people over the edge into financial ruin. Fortunately, the federal government stepped up in a very big way over the last couple of months and provide that economic relief. And so if that relief is not continued, it is people who not only can't buy groceries or can't buy gas anymore, they can't pay their rent. Now, you know, hopefully you'll have some landlords and you'll have some mortgage folks that will be lenient to people, but that causes a greater stress on the crisis as you have this kind of wave of money not coming in that is anticipated right now. And so fundamentally, this economy, this economic recovery really won't pick up until we solve the public health crisis. This kind of V-shaped recovery that the president keeps talking about doesn't happen as long as we have a V-shaped curve in COVID cases. And so as precarious as the situation is right now, we also have conditions on the ground right now where nearly half of states are either pausing or pulling back their reopenings in major states like California, Texas, and Florida. So that's going to continue to put a lot of pressure on this economy. And it sort of speaks to why Washington has to come together to fix this. And I should note, House Democrats have passed a $3 trillion economic relief package. And so that's a great place to start these negotiations over the next couple of weeks.
And I'm going to use an economic term, idiotic. That's how it was described when some GOP leadership said, well, you know what, if we extend the CARE Act going forward, it's going to disincentivize people to go back to work. That's presuming that there's a job to go back to, but to create millions of people that potentially could be homeless here or wouldn't be able to put food on the table in the middle of a pandemic, I mean, there is no economic rationale to do that. It's not like a kick in the pants is what everybody needs right now. I understand some might even be doing better than they were before the pandemic, but there's no economic rationale to do this, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, let's take a step back. I mean, this argument that this causes a disincentive for people to go back to work. So the CARES Act provided an additional $600 a week in unemployment benefits. And the reason that is because many states in this country have abominably low unemployment benefits. Arizona, it's $240 a week. In Florida, it's $275 a week. And so if you divide that by a 40-hour work week, that is less than the federal minimum wage of $7.25. And so the reason why this additional money went in is that the amount that states are providing is so low. Now, look, we can have a broader argument about whether that $600 should be tailored to the amount that states are putting out or somehow adjusted. But it's very clear this is money that needs to be pumped into the economy. And the lesson we learned from the Great Recession is that if you don't deal with these financial crises in a big way, all that does is prolong the hurt. And it's one of the reasons why the effects of the Great Recession lasted as long as it did.
And the only one that can actually deal with this on this macro level is the federal government. There's nobody else. And I think, Chris, there's a mistake. Maybe some folks think, well, this is terrible, but it's going to affect just renters. No, I mean, if you have a mortgage right now, the CARE Act applied to you. Small businesses, big businesses, but small businesses would be impacted by it. Student loans would be impacted by this as well. I mean, it's the gamut that if all of a sudden the spigot gets turned off at a time when this country isn't remotely ready for it, I mean, I don't think I can exaggerate how consequential the impacts would be. And when we look at these unemployment numbers, a lot of these job losses, they're starting to look like they're permanent job losses.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, you know, we've seen some positive numbers over the last couple of days with retail sales going up. But what is really changing in the economy right now is accelerations of trends that happened beforehand. People are moving away from brick and mortar retailers and shopping more online. So what it's done is shift money in different places, but online retailers, frankly, employ a lot fewer people than people that the mom and pop bookstore or neighborhood deli. And so you're going to have a shift to jobs that there are far fewer people in, which causes a problem. And let's just put another thing on the table, which we have not talked about. Let's talk about layoffs of state and local government employees. And you raised it appropriately. Only the federal government can deal with some of these issues. State governments cannot run a budget deficit, and they've incurred billions of dollars of additional expense because of the pandemic. And without a lifeline from Washington, they're going to be starting to cut, whether it's aid to hospitals or to schools, or more importantly, layoffs of teachers and police and firefighters. So that's a second wave of layoffs that is coming down the road.
And not that this should be the driver, but when these things called fiscal cliffs, or they're commonly known, that could be happening at the end of the month, they freak out the markets, don't they? I know the 401ks aren't the biggest priority at the moment for a lot of people, but if you want to have a stock market here that seizes, just go ahead and pull the plug here at the end of the month on the CARES Act, and let's see what happens, right?
Yeah, you know, look, there's always a disconnect between the stock market and the economy, but I think it's been pretty dramatic over the last couple of days where you see side-by-side headlines of record COVID cases exceeding 70,000 and the NASDAQ hitting a record high. And part of why that is because the stock market is based on a sense of long-term certainty, the sense that things are going to improve. But yes, if you've got millions of people without money to spend, unemployment staying elevated or rising, people not being able to make good on their mortgages and continuing to have COVID cases, which are causing more shutdown, you're going to also see the stock market have a reaction to that as well.
Finally, you thankfully are not in the government now, but you know the way Washington works. Are you confident at all that sanity is going to prevail here and they're going to get something done here so that we won't have a gap between the end of July and the next package, if and when it happens?
You know, I am cautiously optimistic. First, because House Democrats have put a $3 trillion proposal out there. That's a good place to start. It's frankly in the president's political interest for more money to go into the economy right now. Although the proposal he's putting on the table, he's drawing a line on the sand, is that he wants a payroll tax cut, which is opposed by, frankly, members of Congress in both parties. The other sticking point right now is that Senate Republicans are insisting on liability immunity for businesses so that they can't be sued if they reopen and people get sick. Everyone is drawing their line in the sand. I think we're going to kind of come down to the wire. I think something will get done. I don't think it's going to be as extensive as it should be. And ultimately, it's, again, it continues to be kind of a Band-Aid, because until you get this health crisis under control, we're really not going to have a full economic recovery.
Mr. Liu, I appreciate the time today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So people are facing financial peril, as we just debated. But when we come back, we're going to debate about whether or not we should reopen schools. And meanwhile, COVID continues to spread out of control. Up next, the new COVID record nobody wanted the U.S. to set, and we keep on setting them. We've got the latest news and numbers next.